Welcome, first of all, to this webinar on a rainy, grey afternoon, it is up here, on the final stage interview. So welcome to everybody. Some of you, this may be your first webinar with us. For some of you, you may be seasoned regulars and we've seen you on each of them, but either way, welcome. So let's see where this one fits in. So this is week 7 of the webinar series, amazingly, week 7. And you can see there that it fits in as number 7. We've covered the previous 6 topics, and if you've missed any of those or you want to go back and revisit any of them, then we have been uploading them at the end of each week onto our YouTube channel. Thank you for everyone that's subscribed to our YouTube channel. We've suddenly seemed to have got loads of followers on there, which is fantastic. But there's a link to the YouTube channel at the end of this webinar, so you can check that out if you haven't already. So that's that one. So some guidelines for the webinars. As always, we do invite you to be present and to participate in the session. We're using Zoom chat. So if you've got any questions or any thoughts, then please just drop them into the chat function. So if you can set it to all panelists and all attendees, it means everyone can see your question and everyone can see our response. I'm on questions today, so feel free to keep me busy in that section. And we're also going to have a little bit of interaction about halfway through or just over halfway through. We'll save that surprise till we get to it, but we're looking for a little bit of interaction in there. So yeah, see a few people saying hello already, so that's great. Hello everyone. So yeah, get involved. We had quite a lively group on Monday, so yeah, get stuck in. If you could just mute your phone so you're not distracted and we can keep your attention for the rest of the session, and make use of the tools available. So we've got a list of tools to recommend to you at the end of this webinar, a few freebies I think that we're going to send out to you as well. So stay on to the end so you can see what they are. So if you haven't come across us yet, I'm Sophie, I'm MD here at SRS, also the author of the book From Learner to Earner, which this webinar series is based upon. At SRS, we work with employers and universities within graduate recruitment, so we're very well experienced in terms of designing assessment materials for big employers and helping them to recruit their graduates. And then we do a lot of work with universities where we run assessment centre simulations. You can see my contact details there on the screen. If we're not already connected and you would like to connect with me, then I'd love to see you over on whichever channel you are most comfortable with. Helen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm the University Partnerships Manager at SRS, work alongside Sophie to deliver employability workshops, assessment centre experiences, and of course these webinars, which we've really enjoyed delivering. I hope you find this one useful. A lot of you are already getting engaged with Zoom chat there, which is where we'll be responding to your questions throughout the webinar. Just a quick reminder, if you could set the Zoom chat to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your questions, that'd be much appreciated. Thank you.
Great, thanks Helen. And as always, we will be joined on each webinar by a guest expert in graduate recruitment to hear their valuable insight and top tips. Today we have some advice from Makar Smith. Makar is currently Regional Recruitment Manager for dunnhumby and is based out in Bangkok. He's worked within graduate recruitment for a long time, specifically with dunnhumby in a couple of different roles, Expedia, Deutsche Bank, and also Agoda. So he's going to be sharing with us some of his thoughts. I'm now going to pass you over to Helen, who's going to be running the majority of the session.
Brilliant, thanks Sophie. So you'll see from the agenda that we're going to look at how to prepare for that final interview, be it video or in person, the different types of questions, how to really stand out and make an impact, and how to manage your nerves. Before we go into any detail, let's hear from Makar Smith on what to expect at this stage.
Hi there, I'm Makar Smith. I'm the dunnhumby Regional Recruitment Manager in Asia Pacific. I'm here to talk to you about your final interview, a couple of ideas on what you might expect, and a couple of thoughts on what you can do to prepare. So you're at your final stage interview now, and very well done for getting to this point. You'll probably be interviewing for around 45 minutes to an hour with a more senior member of the organisation. Try and find out a little bit about their background if you know in advance who you'll be interviewing with. Try and understand from the recruitment team what they're going to be looking for at this phase. It's not a gimme. You're not over the line until you've actually been successful at the final interview stage. So prepare thoroughly for an intense and rigorous interview.
Thanks to Makar there. So how is this final stage different to interviews earlier in the recruitment process? So as Makar said, you're buzzing from having successfully already completed so many stages of the recruitment process, whether that's telephone or video interviews or psychometric tests, and you've now reached that last and crucial start of the process, the final interview. I did actually want to point out that some of the larger employers have actually removed this part of the process so as to help reduce the unconscious bias of interviewers. However, it is still broadly used, and it can be a standalone event or it can be part of an assessment centre. So with regards to the format of this interview, it will be done via video or in person. And one student actually drew attention to the fact that at the moment, some employers are actually giving candidates a choice. If this is the case, then it's really up to you which of these alternatives is going to make you feel most confident and comfortable. And you certainly won't be penalised for whichever one you pick. But if it is possible for you, I'm inclined to choose an in-person interview because it can be that bit easier to make that personal connection with your assessor. In terms of who interviews you, it can vary widely depending on the organisation and the role. Broadly speaking, your early interviews will likely be conducted by someone from the HR or graduate recruitment team. And in most cases, these will have been one-to-one interviews. For the final stage, you might have a panel of interviewers or anywhere between 1 to 3 separate one-to-one interviews, particularly as it can be harder to have a panel of interviewers all on the same video interview. Your interviewers might still include someone from HR, but you're likely to be interviewed by more senior people. And if you haven't already, your potential line manager is likely to be one of them. For technical positions, you're also likely to be interviewed by someone with experience in that area. Let's have a look at the content now. So the interview is likely to be a lot longer than the ones you've had previously, usually between 45 minutes up to an hour. You're also likely to get asked some of the same questions, such as tell us about yourself and why you want to work for the organisation. Now, it's okay to give the same answers, particularly as your reasons for wanting to work for them won't have changed. However, you may need to go into more detail. But before we go into specific types of questions, let's have a look at how best to prepare. As you should have already done before reaching this stage, really research the organisation and get to grips with their values and culture. Ideally, you want to speak their language and allow some of these values to filter through into your answers. Secondly, check their social media and have a broad understanding of what their current priorities are. You may also be asked questions about your understanding of the industry they work in, and so look into potential issues and trends. Be able to identify their main competitors. Research the role and review the job description. Make sure you're very familiar with the requirements and responsibilities of the role. Identify the key skills and experience they're looking for and be ready to answer questions about how you have these same key skills. You should also try to find out who is interviewing you. You may be able to link in with them beforehand and do some background checks on their experience and what they're particularly interested in. We mentioned in the webinar pre-task that it's impossible to predict every question that you'll be asked in an interview. However, you can and should prepare for commonly asked questions, like tell me about yourself or why have you applied for this role. As part of that task, we also asked you to think about 5 to 6 key examples or achievements that you could use to answer different questions. And the example we gave was about being part of a football team, because this could be used to answer questions about teamwork, resilience, leadership, or even influencing others by just changing the focus of your answer. For example, you could have helped to manage frustrations among some of the team. You could have influenced them and negotiated with them. You had to work as a team to win the match. Perhaps you were doing particularly badly as a football team, so it's how you overcame that, how you improved morale. That could be about resilience. So it's to try and show you how one key example can be used for different questions. And what we would remind you at this point is that the more unique the example, the better. Although clearly if you have relevant work experience, then you should definitely draw on this. Finally, make sure you've prepared your own killer questions to ask at the end of the interview, and we'll go on to talk about this. Remember to take care of yourself. Now, the night before your interview, you want to make sure that you get lots of sleep, avoid alcohol, and prepare your outfit. On the morning of your interview, make sure you have a decent, healthy breakfast and avoid too much caffeine. Set yourself up to be the best you can be for the day ahead. In terms of what to have with you, it's good to have a drink or a bottle of water to hand. You should also have a notebook and a pen in case you need to jot some things down. Have the job description or person specification handy. And if it's an in-person interview, it might be a good idea to take along any academic or training certificates that the interviewer might like to see. It's also worth having easy access to your CV in case you need to refer to it. For in-person interviews, some employers may also ask you to bring your right to work ID, which is usually your passport or some other photo ID that you can provide. What to wear. So most assessment centres and job interviews are considered formal. So I recommend wearing a suit unless directed otherwise. Remember, you want to stand out for the right reasons and not because of your fashion sense. Keep your outfit simple and conservative and stick with grey, navy or black. Avoid those bright garish colours. When it comes to bags, shoes, ties, scarves and tights, it's best to play it safe. Keep these things muted and make sure they coordinate with your outfit. I'm about to share some top tips for both women and men, bearing in mind that some of them are more relevant for in-person interviews. Now, I know the more formal approach sounds a little boring and conventional, but it's your personality that needs to shine through at the interview, not your clothing. Whatever the industry, always check with the employer if you're unsure, because it's far better to ask and be prepared than to feel totally uncomfortable and out of place. This will put you off your game and it'll make you stand out for all the wrong reasons. You may also find some of this advice irrelevant if you're applying for a job in the creative industry, such as fashion or design. In this case, you'll be expected to stand out for your fashion and be on trend. So you'd want to grab your Vivienne Westwood or your Alexander McQueen. So tips for women. Don't overdo the jewellery. Keep heels to an appropriate height, no more than 3 inches. Make sure you aren't showing too much cleavage and wear tights, even if it's summer. And if you do wear a dress, make sure it's smart and mostly one solid colour. You also want to keep makeup and nail varnish subtle and understated. Tips for men. So ties should be low key. You want to avoid those comedic or character prints. Choose a plain shirt, back to those neutral colours of white, pale blue or light grey, and make sure it's ironed. Fasten the top button of your shirt and keep your tie knot tight to your neck. Wear smart shoes and coordinate with a matching belt. These will go well with any traditional suit colour. And ensure your suit fits you well. There's nothing worse than wearing a suit that's 2 times too big and looks like your older brother's hand-me-down. I'm now going to hand you over to Sophie, who's going to talk through some of the different types of questions.
Thanks, Helen. So, yes, we're going to start off with competency-based questions. So these can also be known as structured, behavioural or situational interviews, and these are designed to test several skills or competencies. The interviewer will have a list of set questions and will compare your answers to predetermined criteria. These interviews work on the basis that past behaviour is the best predictor of future performance. They're used by employers across all sectors, but are particularly favoured by large graduate recruiters as part of their assessment centre process. A competency-based interview is systematic and each question targets a skill needed for the job. You can see on the screen here some of the key competencies that are regularly used by employers. You'll need to answer the questions in the context of previous experience or real-life events. The skills being tested will depend largely on the job that you're interviewing for and the industry or sector that you'll be working in. You should expect questions to open with things like, tell us about a time when you did this, give an example of, or describe how you. So if you've been on one of our webinars before, you will recognise this model, and it's a great one for interviews, which we've mentioned in the past. So you will be better placed to answer those types of questions that I've just given there as examples using the STAR technique. And that's why we keep coming back to it, because it is a good one. So as a brief recap, the STAR technique obviously follows the acronym that you see on the screen. So you start off by talking about a situation that you were in, and then you move on to look at the task, describing the challenges and expectations, then covering the action and what you did. And it's particularly important that you cover what you as an individual did, if it's a team example, for example, so that your contribution is very clear. Then move on to talking about the result, ideally with something that's tangible, that stands out. And then finally, just the reflection piece around what could you do differently or better next time, and that just adds to that. So at this point, this is where we talked about having a little bit of interaction. Helen has challenged me to apply the STAR technique to anybody's example. So if anyone wants to chuck any examples into chat, feel free to pop a scenario from your own experience in there, and we can pull out a couple of examples that we can go through for you. So we had quite a lot of things thrown in there on Monday. If anyone's feeling shy, we can reflect back on what some of those were. But we'll give you a moment to put anything into chat that you want to chuck at me to put into a STAR technique, or discuss how you could use it. But in the meantime, I'm just going to move on to an example that a recruiter has shared with me. So I'll give you a moment to read that. So you can see from that example quite a unique example there that a candidate gave an interviewer. So it's a kind of example that you might not necessarily have thought would be useful to bring up in an interview. You might not have thought it's particularly relevant to something, but actually you can see that they've been able to use that in an effective way there. So just having a look at chat, someone's put something in there talking about writing an educational policy paper. So if you were to use that as an example, that would be good because it's quite unique. So I can't think of any examples where I've been given that by a candidate in an interview. So that would be a good one. I think the key thing would be to identify which competency you would relate that to. So we would want a bit more detail to be able to advise you which competency that would be suitable for. But I guess just as a bit of a start for 10 in terms of giving you an example, it might be that you use that to influence people, or to, as an example of strong communication, or an example of working under pressure if you had deadlines. So if you were to put that into a STAR technique, you would talk about, I guess it depends what the context of that was. So were you working for local government, for example, and that might be your situation, and your task was to write this educational policy paper. So the action was that you gathered all your research, you interviewed the people that you needed to, you got all the data together to do that, and the result was that you delivered a paper that was well received, it was on time, and it met the objectives that you'd been set. And your reflection might be relating to some of the feedback that you had on that. Did you miss something out, or was there something you could have added that would have made it stronger? So that might work in that example. So a couple more examples there. Oh, we've got a few now. I'm not sure we'll have time to do all of them, but they're going so fast I can't keep up now. That's great. So managing a challenging behaviour. So I guess if you've experienced that probably in a workplace scenario or potentially at university in group work or something, then you could definitely apply that to the STAR technique quite well. So you would talk about the situation. So is it a workplace where you've had to deal with a colleague that's been particularly challenging, and then you can give a specific example of where you've done that, the action that you took, the result, did that improve the behaviour? And then your reflection might be that you would have challenged it earlier potentially. Right, we'll just take a couple more. So I guess just sort of give it a bit of a broad overview. So Lizzie's saying, a summer research project working in a science lab, would it be good to discuss the common challenge of when experiments didn't work? Yeah, definitely, because that might be a common challenge to you, but actually I can't think of any times I've heard about that as an example in an application form or an interview. So although it might be quite common for you, it won't be common for lots of other candidates. I think that would be a really interesting one to use, Lizzie.
It's a really good example to show what you've learned from your mistakes.
Absolutely, great one to do that final R that we stick in our STAR model with the reflection. Molly's saying, researching and writing a dissertation with limited resources under lockdown. Yep, absolutely. My one sort of question mark around that would be to make sure that it's detailed enough that it's specific to you, Molly, because I think a lot of students will be able to use that example right now. So how can you make yours stand out from others? But I think that would be a great example of resilience, which is something that we're often hearing that employers don't see enough of in students. And by God, you're going to have plenty of examples of that right now. So that could work well. Becky's saying, working in a uni call centre over clearing first year accommodation allocations. Yeah, that would be a great one. Of probably working under pressure, managing expectations, communication. Examples of using initiative. Becky always finds that one hardest to answer. It's hard to kind of give any advice without knowing what your experience is, but I'm sure there'll be loads of things that you could do. So even in the example that you've given there around the call centre, did you have an opportunity to make any decisions? Have you had to use your judgment to decide which, what to offer students in that situation in clearing, rather than having to sort of check with the manager?
Could be something quite small as well, couldn't it? So something about using your initiative to come on these webinars, for example, to drive your development forward and get involved in some online training, using your initiative to seek feedback from your peers, from people you work with. So it doesn't have to be like a big project. It could be a small thing that you've shown initiative in.
Definitely, and I think joining the webinar series is a great example of doing something that's been optional, that is developing yourself, and also would impact on resilience as well, I guess, because you're probably on these webinars because you've got a bit more time on your hands and you wanted to do something proactive and productive. So that would be great. Learning, reflecting from previous mistakes or unsuccessful periods during the career path is another final comment that's in there. I'm not quite sure what that is in relation to. You're also saying you often ask close friends at work for honest feedback. Yes, I mean, that's always great. And we reflected on that if anyone joined us on that first webinar ages ago now, Finding Your Strengths, which you'll find on YouTube if you didn't join that. We've got a really good task in there that if you haven't done, I would recommend you go back and do. And that's around identifying your strengths and weaknesses, but then getting a colleague or a friend or a family member to do the same exercise on you. And that would be really good to get some honest feedback and some good examples that you might be able to use in interview as well. Great. Okay, well, thanks for your yeah, that was good. Thank you, everyone that got involved in that one. So just moving on now to look at strengths-based interviews, which is another approach that you might come across at an interview and is quite common with a number of large graduate recruiters right now. So this interview allows you to focus on what you enjoy doing rather than on what you can do, which is more competency based. So the theory is that by matching your strengths to the role, you'll be happier in your work, perform better, learn quicker, and stay with the organisation for longer. Unlike competency-based interviews, strength-based interviews feel more informal and personal and allow employers to gain insight into candidates' personalities to see if they would be a good fit for the company. It's important to know that strengths-based questions don't have a right or wrong answer, but you must answer the questions honestly. Making information up will give the interviewer a false impression of you, and you could get found out later. Interviewers will be taking note of your body language and your tone of voice, which can provide insight into your sincerity. If you're genuinely describing something that you enjoy, you'll be animated, and your enthusiasm and your motivation are going to shine through. Candidates often get caught out by questions that ask them to identify their weaknesses. So stay away from generic responses. So for example, I'm a perfectionist, bit of a classic, but that can sometimes come across as a little bit arrogant or insincere. Instead, think of things that you've struggled with, show some vulnerability, and select real weaknesses. For example, you could talk about how you coped and what you've learned about yourself during lockdown, which is something that we just mentioned before. Make sure that you explain how you use your strengths to overcome your weaknesses. Hand you back to Helen now.
Thanks, Sophie. Okay, so asking questions at the end of your interview, it's just as important as answering questions during the interview. It's your opportunity to find out more about the role and the organisation. It's your chance to quiz the interviewer, obviously in the right way, demonstrate why you're the most suitable candidate and stand out from other candidates as well. Now, if you don't ask any questions, you really run the risk of the interviewer thinking you're just not interested or you're not prepared. And also make sure you don't ask questions that you can easily find the answers to yourself or that cover topics which have already been addressed in the assessment process. So here's some examples of some great questions. You've got, how is performance measured within the role or organisation? How would you describe the organisation's working environment and culture? What are your expectations of a successful candidate within the first 3 months of them being in the role? Or something like, I've seen from your website that you plan to expand your market share in such and such by 20%. Can you tell me more about this? Questions to avoid. So some classic examples here. What is the salary for this position? You should have already seen that from the job description. If the job description does say salary to be confirmed or agreed at a later stage, now's not the time to ask about that. You want to be asking about your salary when you're actually offered the job. What holidays would I be entitled to? It's a very self-interested question, that, again, one to avoid at this final stage. What does your department do? Again, hopefully you would have had time to research that already. It might have been clear from the job description, or you've probably been able to find that information on their website. When can I start taking time off? Yeah, you definitely don't want to be asking that at a final interview stage. Again, that's all coming into what you negotiate with the employer when you're successful getting that job. So here are some simple ways to make an impact and stand out to your interviewers. Firstly, you want to be positive. Be polite and professional with any staff you meet before or after the interview. And during the interview, avoid talking about any personal problems unless it's completely necessary. Never talk badly about your previous employers. Be clear. So answer all the questions clearly and concisely, evidencing your most relevant skills, experiences, and achievements. Now, it's okay to pause before answering a difficult question to give yourself time to think or to seek clarification if you don't understand what the question means. When answering, take your time and don't speak too quickly. Pay attention to your body language. If in person, give the interviewer a firm handshake, both when you arrive and before you leave the interview. And throughout that interview, remember to smile frequently, make eye contact, and use your hands to emphasize those key points. Don't fidget. You also want to show enthusiasm. So allow your personality to shine throughout the interview. Be curious, ask questions at appropriate moments. This will demonstrate that you're genuinely interested in the role and the interviewer. And finally, be memorable. So can you submit a document at the end of the interview? Maybe a 3-month plan outlining what you'd like to achieve in the role? This will really show your enthusiasm and passion, and it will leave that positive, lasting impression. Managing your nerves. So it's completely natural to have some nerves before an interview, and they can actually be a positive thing because they can keep you focused and engaged. But what you don't want to do is allow your nerves to get the better of you and ruin your chances of securing that graduate job. So here's some general tips for keeping your nerves in check. So practice your responses to some typical interview questions. Get your family or friends to help you if you can, or your career service. Remember that the interviewer wants you to succeed. They want to find the right person for the position and see you at your best. Don't forget to breathe. And when you breathe deeply, your body relaxes and you're more in control of your thoughts and feelings. Don't worry about forgetting things. It's not a memory test. It is okay to refer to some notes. Just make sure that you're not reading directly from a script. And finally, remember that it's just a chat. An interview is not an interrogation. It's a conversation about you, a topic that you know all about. We'll now hear some more from Maka with his top tips for that final interview.
My advice on the final stage is quite short and sweet. Continue to do what you've done to get to this point. That's what the organisation like, and they want to continue seeing. Also, be authentic. Be the person you are. Whilst it's competitive, you don't need to try and be something you're not, or you'll get found out. Good luck.
Thanks to Maka there. So you've completed that final interview. What can you expect afterwards? You may be familiar with the term ghosting in relation to dating, but the term is now used within recruitment as well. And it refers to that frustrating wall of silence you might hit at any stage of the recruitment process. It can be particularly frustrating if you've invested a lot of time with one employer and have made it through their entire process to the point where you're just waiting to hear if you've actually got the job. Now, there could be a number of reasons why you haven't heard back. So for graduate roles, there are usually a number of assessment centres, and the employer can't make an offer until the last one is finished. Earlier on in the process, they might have a huge backlog of applications to get through. And from time to time, business priorities change at short notice. Hiring plans might get frozen for the sake of cost cutting, and I know there's been a lot of change in the recruitment sector at the moment. The best thing you can do is to be patient. Now, if it really has been a long time since you heard from the employer, and especially if they said they would get back to you by a certain time, send a short and polite email to ask when you're likely to hear from them, repeating that you're keen to secure the role, but also stating that you're managing other applications. Now, it can be hugely disappointing not to get a job offer, especially if you had your heart set on working for one particular employer, and if you made it to the end of the recruitment process and were feeling confident. Sometimes it is just a matter of luck, and in a year where they had more vacancies, you would have been one of those lucky ones. Even though your ego might be bruised and your confidence might have taken a knock, the best thing you can do is request feedback. If you make it to the last stage of the process, most employers will provide you with feedback on request. Earlier on in the process, they might not do this. It may be something generic or automated, simply because of the huge volume of applications they've had. But if you can get feedback, it will really help you work out where you can develop and what you can improve. It's now that time when you have to consider your options. Are there still schemes and jobs which you can apply for? If yes, and they're of interest, get back into that application process, armed with your feedback. You might decide to take a break, get a casual job, or go travelling. And what you do during this time could provide some excellent experience to share the next time you apply for a graduate job. You can actually reapply to most graduate schemes the following year. And I've met candidates who were unsuccessful, but came back the following year and were offered a position. So we're back to that key skill around resilience that employers are looking for. And reapplying gives you an opportunity to highlight how you bounced back after a disappointment. Take a look at this advice from an employer before I hand you back to Sophie. Okay, hopefully most of you had a chance to read through that. We will be sending these slides and a recording of this webinar out to you, but I'll hand you back to Sophie to look at what's coming next.
Thanks, Helen. We'll just cover a few last bits before we finish, so make sure you stay on so you can see the resources that we're going to be sending you. So next week is our final topic, and we're going to be covering the transition into the world of work. So this may not feel imminent to you if you're kind of first year or second year, but actually there's some great tools that we've got within this workshop, or the webinar rather, that will help you longer term, and things that you can come back to at some point. So you can see there what we're going to be covering next week. So if you're not already signed up for that, get signed up. And as always, we've got some resources to share with you. So we have a resource on competency-based example questions. Also, we've got one on strengths-based example questions. And we will send both of these resources to you with the recording for this webinar. We always talk about your career service. They are the biggest resource going, and they'll be doing some fantastic things. So if you haven't already, check out what they are offering right now. And you've also got the link there to the book, which the webinar series is based upon, which is my book, From Learner to Earner. Now, we did mention the YouTube channel, which I think actually we might have a link to. Have we got a link to it on the next page? Yes or no? No, we haven't. You can find us on YouTube as well. I thought we had a link to it on here, but if you haven't already, do check out our YouTube channel, because we are uploading previous webinars. We want to go back and review them. Go and take a look. We are uploading one each week onto there. If you're not already connected to us, we'd love to connect with you either on our own platforms or SRS ones. And we've loved hearing from you so far, and when you've been tagging us in posts on Twitter and LinkedIn, we've spotted a few. So thanks for those. We're using the hashtag #LockdownYourCareer. Now, when you come off this webinar, you will be taken to that very short survey. We take you there after each topic. We'd love you to just spend literally, it's less than 2 minutes to complete that, and just leave us some feedback. I'm also really keen, if anyone has any suggestions of future webinar content, if you could stick that in the box at the end of the survey, because we've really enjoyed doing these, and it might be that we do some future topics once we've finished that final session, whether we do those maybe later in the year or something. But if anyone's got any suggestions or feedback, we would love to hear them. So thank you very much to everyone for taking part today. We've had some good interaction there, so that's been great. And we'll see you on a future webinar.
Thank you. Bye-bye.